If you're living outside the United States right now, or even thinking about moving abroad, stop what you're doing and listen closely, because this update could determine whether your Social Security check keeps coming or suddenly disappears. And I'm not exaggerating. New Social Security rules are rolling out that change where the government can legally send your monthly payments. And here's the part most people don't realize until it's too late. Certain countries are now considered restricted or prohibited, meaning if you live there, your benefits could be paused, delayed, or stopped completely, even if you've been receiving them for years without a single issue. Imagine waking up one morning overseas, checking your bank account like you always do, and your payment isn't there. No warning, no explanation, just silence. Then you find out it's because of a rule change, a compliance update, or because your country suddenly landed on a restricted list tied to sanctions, security rules, or financial regulations. And it's not just retirees who are affected. This can hit Social Security retirement, SSDI disability, and survivor benefits too, meaning families, widows, disabled Americans, and seniors abroad could all be impacted. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what's changing, which countries are risky, how the rules really work, and what you need to do right now to protect your payments before you get caught off guard. If you want to stay ahead and keep your benefits safe, hit that like button right now. You've probably heard people say, "Don't worry, Social Security follows you anywhere." And for a long time, that felt true. If you earned your benefits, you could retire in Mexico, move to the Philippines, settle in Portugal, or live quietly in Thailand, and your payments would just keep showing up like clockwork. But here's what's different right now. The rules have shifted, and the Social Security Administration is tightening the system in ways that most Americans overseas still don't fully understand. And the scary part is, you don't get a dramatic warning. You don't get a countdown. You usually find out the hard way, when the money doesn't arrive. Let me be crystal clear. This isn't about rumors, and it's not a random scare headline. The U.S. government has always had restrictions on where it can send benefits, but the enforcement is getting sharper, the monitoring is getting faster, and the list of problem countries is something that can change. That's what makes this moment so dangerous for people living abroad. Even if you've been receiving payments for years without a single issue, you can still get caught by a sudden policy update, a compliance change, a banking restriction, or a verification requirement you didn't realize you missed. And if you're thinking, "Okay, but I'm not in one of those obvious countries," stay with me, because the risk isn't only about where you live. It's also about how you receive your payments, how your identity is verified, whether your address and banking details are current, and whether your residency status triggers extra scrutiny. A lot of people are shocked to learn that their benefits can be interrupted not because they did something wrong, but because the system flags them as a potential risk. So let's walk through what's happening, why it's happening, and what you need to do if you're outside the US or planning to leave. And I'm going to explain this in a way that's actually easy to follow, because most official explanations are so dry and complicated that people give up halfway through. And that's exactly how they end up losing months of payments. First, you need to understand how Social Security payments work internationally. Social Security is a U.S. federal benefit program, but it's not a global service. The SSA doesn't just send money anywhere. It sends money through banking systems that have to comply with U.S. law, U.S. sanctions, U.S. anti-fraud requirements, and international financial regulations. That means even if you personally qualify for Social Security, the government can still restrict the delivery of your payment based on where you are, where your bank is, or how your payment is routed. And that's where the term prohibited countries comes in. Some countries are restricted because of sanctions. Some are restricted because of security concerns. Some are restricted because of financial system issues that make it difficult to verify identities or prevent fraud. And sometimes, restrictions aren't even about the country itself, but about what happens when payments pass through certain banks or certain financial networks. Now, let's talk about what happens when you're in one of these restricted places. If you live in a prohibited country, you may not be able to receive your Social Security payments at all while you're there. That doesn't always mean you lose your benefits permanently, but it can mean they're suspended, delayed, or held until you leave. In some situations, payments can be reissued later when you move to an eligible country, but that process is not always smooth. It can involve paperwork, proof of residency changes, identity verification, and long waits. And here's something most people don't think about. What if you're not living there permanently, but you're spending extended time there? What if you're visiting family? What if you're caring for a sick parent? What if you're stuck because of visa issues, health problems, or political instability? You can end up in a situation where your Social Security payments are affected even though you didn't move in the traditional sense. Another big issue is that the SSA does not treat all benefits the same. Social Security retirement benefits are one thing, SSDI is another, survivor benefits are another, and SSI is in its own category entirely. SSI, which is Supplemental Security Income, is almost always not payable outside the United States. So if you're on SSI and you leave the country, that's a whole different conversation. And many people are shocked when they discover that SSI is basically tied to living inside the US. But even for retirement and SSDI, where international payments are usually allowed in many countries, the rules still have sharp edges. There are countries where payments are allowed, but only with extra verification. There are countries where payments are allowed for US citizens but not for non-citizens. There are countries where payments are allowed, but banking restrictions create constant delays. And there are countries where things were fine for years, but the financial environment changed and suddenly the payment pipeline becomes unstable. Now let's talk about the part that makes this feel so personal and urgent. When you're overseas, Social Security isn't just a benefit. For many people, it's their rent, it's their groceries, it's their medication, it's their ability to stay independent. And when that payment stops, the impact isn't theoretical. It's immediate. It can be terrifying, especially if you're older, living alone, or relying on that check as your main income. And the reason this topic is exploding right now is because more Americans are living abroad than ever before. People are retiring overseas because the cost of living is lower. Some are moving because they have family abroad. Some are digital nomads. Some are veterans. Some are disabled. Some are simply trying to stretch their retirement dollars. And the SSA knows that international beneficiaries are harder to monitor than domestic ones. That's why the verification systems are getting stricter. One of the biggest tools the SSA uses for overseas recipients is identity and eligibility verification. You may have heard of proof of life forms. You may have heard of questionnaires that ask about your address, your work status, your marital status, and your citizenship. These forms are not optional. And the dangerous part is, overseas mail can be unreliable. You might never receive the letter. You might receive it late, or it might arrive after the deadline. And then suddenly your payments are suspended. And if you've never experienced an SSA suspension, let me tell you what it feels like. It feels like being locked out of your own money. You call. You wait. You get transferred. You're told to send documents. You send them. You wait again. And all the while, your bills are still due. Your landlord doesn't care that SSA is processing something. Your pharmacy doesn't care that your benefit is under review. That's why prevention is everything. This is also why your My Social Security account is not optional anymore if you live abroad. If you don't have it, you're basically blind. You won't see warnings. You won't see payment changes. You won't see alerts. And by the time you notice something is wrong, you might already be weeks behind. A lot of people overseas rely on the old habit of, I'll just check my bank account. But by then, the problem has already happened. So you see the theme here. Living abroad makes everything more fragile. Not impossible, not hopeless, but fragile. And the new rules and tighter enforcement make it even more fragile. Now, let's address the biggest fear people have when they hear restricted countries. They imagine a short list of extreme places. And yes, there are obvious ones. Countries like North Korea and Cuba have been restricted for a long time. But what people don't realize is that restrictions can also expand based on sanctions, political changes, or financial compliance issues. And you don't get a big public announcement that says, hey, by the way, this country is now a problem. Sometimes the first sign is that payments start failing. Now, let's talk about something else people misunderstand. Just because you're a US citizen doesn't automatically protect you. Citizenship matters, yes, but compliance matters more. The SSA has rules about who can receive benefits abroad based on citizenship status, the type of benefit, and the country of residence. For example, some non-citizens can receive benefits abroad only in certain countries. Some can't receive them at all. Some can only receive them for a limited time. The rules are detailed, and that's why people get blindsided. And if you're a dual citizen, or you have a second passport, or you've lived outside the US for a long time, you may face extra scrutiny in certain cases. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the system is designed to reduce fraud risk. Fraud prevention is a major driver behind these changes. The government has been under pressure to reduce improper payments, and overseas payments are considered higher risk because they're harder to verify. Now, I want you to picture a real scenario. Let's say you're retired. You live in a country that has been fine for years. You've been receiving your payments like clockwork. You're not paying attention to SSA updates because you think everything is stable. Then one day, your payment is delayed. You assume it's a banking issue. A few days pass. Still nothing. You call SSA and they tell you your payment is suspended pending verification. You never received the verification letter because it went to your old address. Or it arrived late. Or you moved. Now you have to prove your identity, your residency, and your eligibility. And while you do that, your payments are frozen. That is happening to people right now. And the worst part is, many of them don't have savings to cover the gap. They don't have family nearby. They don't have a backup plan. They're relying on a system that is not designed for flexibility. So what can you do? The first thing is to know whether your country is on the restricted list. If you're planning to move abroad, this should be step one before you buy a plane ticket, before you sell your house, before you cancel your US health insurance, before you commit your retirement plan to a new country. Because if you choose a country that is restricted, you could end up living there without access to your Social Security income. The second thing is to understand that even in allowed countries, you may still face verification requirements. And those requirements are not something you can ignore. If you're overseas, you need to treat SSA mail like an emergency signal. You need to respond fast. You need to keep copies of everything. You need to make sure your contact information is current. And you also need to understand that the SSA can request proof that you're alive, proof of your address, proof of your citizenship, proof of your work status, and proof of your marital status, because those details affect your eligibility. For example, if you receive survivor benefits, your marital status can matter. If you receive disability benefits, your work status can matter. If you receive retirement benefits early, your work income can matter. So the system is constantly watching for changes. Now, one of the most overlooked dangers for Americans overseas is that many of them keep working. Maybe you're teaching English, maybe you're consulting, maybe you're running an online business, maybe you're doing freelance work. You might think, I'm overseas, so it doesn't matter. But it can matter. If you're under full retirement age and earning income, the earnings test still applies. And if you're on SSDI, work activity can affect your eligibility. And if you're not reporting income correctly, you can trigger overpayment issues. Overpayments are another nightmare. If SSA decides you were paid too much, they can demand repayment. And if you're overseas, dealing with that is harder. You might have to file appeals, provide documents, and prove that the overpayment wasn't your fault. And during that process, they can withhold part of your benefits. So even if your payments aren't fully stopped, they can be reduced. And when you combine all of these risks, restricted countries, verification, mail delays, banking compliance, earnings tests, and overpayments, you start to see why this is not a small update. It's a new reality for Americans abroad. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is the list itself, the restricted countries and how the SSA handles them, because this is where people get confused, and confusion is where mistakes happen. The SSA uses a combination of legal restrictions, treasury rules, and international banking agreements to decide where payments can go. Some restrictions are absolute. Some have exceptions. Some depend on your citizenship. Some depend on your type of benefit. Some depend on your residency status, and some depend on whether you are receiving benefits as a worker, a dependent, or a survivor. That's why two people living in the same country can have different outcomes. One might receive benefits without issue, another might have payments suspended, and that can feel random, but it isn't. It's based on categories that most people don't even realize exist. And this is also why you should never rely on someone else's experience as proof that you're safe. Just because your friend in the same country gets paid doesn't guarantee you will. Their benefit type may be different. Their citizenship status may be different. Their banking setup may be different. Their verification history may be different. And those details matter. So if you're watching this and thinking, I'll be fine because my cousin has been in this country for 10 years, that is not enough. You need to check your own eligibility and your own compliance. And the last thing I want to emphasize before we go deeper into the solutions is that you should not wait until the payment stops. Once the payment stops, you're in a reactive position. You're calling, pleading, waiting, and trying to fix something while your bills pile up. The smart move is to do the preventative work now, while everything is still running smoothly. So staying informed doesn't just protect your benefits, it protects you from being exploited. And as we continue, we're going to go step by step through the most common ways people lose payments overseas, the fastest ways to fix issues, and the safest strategies to keep your Social Security income stable no matter where you live.